Hey guys, my name's Tyler, and I want to talk today about this one time that I was in a cult. When I was in high school, I was part of this civic organization for young boys and young men ages 12 to 21, and it is called Demolay. Now, if you're not familiar with Demolay, it is for younger men, and it's sponsored by the Masons, Freemasonry, and the Masonic Lodge. They have different chapters throughout the US and I believe throughout the world. Their name is Demolay International. Now, this group isn't like a super secretive cult. There's no animal sacrifice or anything like that, although a few friends like to joke about that when I was in high school because they didn't know what it was. It is secretive in the fact that we weren't allowed to talk about it unless the people who were interested came to our meetings. And even then, they weren't introduced to everything right off the bat. They could only sit in on a particular portion of the meeting. Now, the meeting room is in the Masonic Lodge. If you're not familiar with the Masons and Freemasonry, I will probably do a video later on talking more about Freemasonry, what that is, and the cult aspects of Freemasonry. The meeting room was set up very similar to what you see in a Masonic Lodge meeting if you are a Mason. The positions, rituals, and other things that they talked about were very similar. We had to wear robes, and there was different positions. I remember there was 4 chairs. Forgive me if I don't remember exactly. I did do some research, but it has been about a decade since I was in Demolay. There were 4 chairs, each on a side of the wall, and they represented north, east, south, and west. And the master deacon, who was kind of the first among equals of the Demolay organization, he would be sitting in the east. He was the master deacon. He would sit in the east, and this is a symbol of the rising sun. At least that is what we were told in the handbook. Then there would be a meridian sun and a setting sun. These are aspects of sun worship, and they are seen also in some of the Masonic rituals. The sun is a heavy part when we go through rituals, and the predetermined things that we had to say had to do with the sun. Even some of the symbols that we used, some of the signs had to do with sun worship. In the handbook that we were given, it was called a sign of distress, and it looked like this. And this is actually the sign of Horus, which is an Egyptian. That's the sign of Osiris, which is an Egyptian god that has to do with sun worship. There's also the sign of the emperor if we did have a guest, and his sign was kind of, he'd have one hand like this and the other like this. Now that was very similar to the sign of Horus, which was kind of like this in sun worship. Both of these signs for Osiris and Horus came from also the Golden Dawn, which was a big cult that a lot of modern day cults kind of stem from. We also had a hand grip when you were greeting a brother, and it was you would shake someone's hand and you would press your finger into their wrist, and that was kind of like you were meeting a brother, and that's how you knew. Now, the Christian definition of a cult is any organization that doesn't follow the God of the Bible. So basically, if you're a Christian and other people follow other gods and other things, they're false religions and or cults. In our handbook that we got for Demolay, it never mentioned Jesus. It never mentioned the Holy Spirit. It never really mentioned God of the Bible in a Christian sense. It did mention God, but not in the way you would as if you were a Christian. To open our meeting and to close our meeting and throughout the meeting, we had to say certain things. We had certain parts to play. I mentioned the robes that we had to wear. I was a chaplain, so mine was white and it had a red cross. I would open the meeting in prayer and I would close the meeting in prayer. When we opened and closed the meeting, we would walk around the room in a specific way. We would have, we had cut corners with a sharp twist of our feet. I can't really show you because the camera angle. Um, it was kind of like a military, just like very sharp. I would bow at an altar, and there would be a Holy Bible. However, it played no significant part. It was really just for show. Now, how DeMolay got started was in the early 1900s. A man started it. His name was Frank S. Land, and he was a Freemason. A little background history on where DeMolay came from. It really stems from this Knights Templar, which has to do a little bit with Freemasonry and the Crusades, and I might talk about the Knights Templar in another video. But basically, his name was Jacques de Molay. He was the 23rd and last Grand Master of the Knights Templar, and he was burned at the stake by King Philip IV of France. King Philip owed the Knights Templar a lot of money. The Knights Templar at that time had a lot of money and was said to have treasure hidden, and King Philip was in debt to them, and he basically rounded up a bunch of French Knights Templar. Jacques de Molay was French, and he tortured them and basically garnered false confessions, which later Jacques de Molay recanted. King Philip didn't like that. He was sentenced originally to life in prison, but King Philip burned them at the stake instead. So this is really a knockoff of what Jesus did for us on the cross. He was called a martyr, but really he just didn't want to give King Philip the Knights Templar's treasure. In the handbook and during the meetings, we were told that this was an example of sacrifice and dying for your friends. It's hard to determine because we don't know a lot about Jacques de Molay or his history, but he was into a lot of like mysticism. The Knights Templar were kind of going downhill at that point. They were getting into some weird things. There were rumors that they started worshiping Baal and Baphomet, which are demon gods. So de Molay has its roots in Knights Templar and also Freemasonry. The Masons, while it's not a Masonic organization, the Freemasons sponsor de Molay, and like I said, their rituals and positions and things that they do are very similar to what you'll see in a Masonic lodge when you're a Mason. And it's kind of just to prep young boys to become a Mason. Notable de Molay members were Walt Disney, John Wayne, and Bill Clinton. Some of them also went on to become Masons. Now, on the frequently asked questions portion of de Molay's website, it says, "Is de Molay a religious organization?" The answer is, one of the qualifications of membership is that you believe in God / a supreme being. So a lot of people ask whether de Molay is a religious organization. The answer is no. This is weird for multiple reasons. The qualification for membership is that you believe in God or supreme being, but we're not a religious organization. The first thing that comes to mind to me for this is like, we're not a church, but you have to believe in God to be a member. It really doesn't make sense. Because they don't claim to be a religious organization, and because you don't have to believe in God, in the God of the Bible, you just have to believe in a supreme being. This is what makes it a cult. You can believe in Buddha. You can believe in the Islam Allah. You could believe in one of the millions of Hindu gods. You could believe that Satan's your god. You could believe in the pagan god and goddess. You can believe in Native American spirits, totems, and gods. You can believe in the Norse god, Odin. You could believe in Zeus. You can believe in anything as long as it's a supreme being. This is really what makes it a cult. You have this altar, you have this holy Bible that you open, you talk about God. A lot of the prayers that I said as a chaplain in de Molay, I didn't know at the time, but when I became a Christian and started studying the Bible, the prayers that I read in the DeMolay handbook, some of them were in the Bible. So they actually use Christian scripture in their handbook, but they don't mention Jesus, and it's not anything about salvation or grace or mercy. You just have to believe in something else above you. As well as they are secretive. They don't give out information. In fact, one of the slogans of the Masons is they don't evangelize. If you want to become a Mason, it is to be one, ask one. Which means if you want to be a Mason, you have to find a Mason and ask them how to become a Mason. They have various symbols, which we can get into if I do a Freemasonry video. You might have seen it. It's like the, what do you call it? Like the circumference scale, and it has a G in the middle. That's a Freemasonry symbol. There's actually a whole chart that has to do with Freemasonry. The sun, there's a sun, which is again sun worship. There's a black and white checkered floor. There's a ladder. There's a few different symbols that you can see that relate to Freemasonry. So we also had in our DeMolay meeting, we had to have a Master Mason overseer. He sometimes would go. He would sometimes go as the title as Dad, and he would oversee the meeting as well. To admit a visitor, I didn't really go into it earlier, but to admit a visitor, he had to swear an oath of secrecy, and he could only be let in during a general session. He would have to stay out in the hallway, and part of our closing portion for our opening ceremony would be he would have to knock on the door if we had a visitor, which I don't think we ever did, but if we had a visitor, he would have to knock on the door, certain number of raps, certain number of a way that you knocked on the door, and he would be admitted. But he wouldn't see any part of the ritual aspects. He would just be admitted into the general session, kind of like what are we doing for fundraisers and what are we doing for fun and that sort of thing. So he didn't see if we had a visitor that wasn't in DeMolay, wasn't a member. He didn't get to see what went on other than the general session. And then when we closed out the meeting, he would have to leave again. So what else can I say about this? I guess that's it. Thanks for watching, guys.